Welcome to the F4 podcast, where your hosts, Brian, Brooke, Charles, and Vanessa, discuss all things faith, family, friends, and fitness. What is F4? Sometimes it's a glimpse into how we navigate the world, and sometimes it's a deep dive into how we handle the four main areas of our lives. If you want to have a healthier relationship with God, family, friends, and yourself, this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this episode.
To be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. It's what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our own self-righteousness, and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. Timothy Keller. Welcome to episode 28 of the F4 podcast, where we dive deep into all things relating to faith, family, friends, and fitness. And I'm Charles Giddens. I'm one of the F4 hosts, and I'm joined today by the F4 regulars, my wife Vanessa, and our super awesome friends, Brian and Brooke Marston. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen and watch our podcast. If you could follow us on Instagram and like and share the podcast, we would greatly appreciate it. If you would like to be a sponsor of the show, you can message us on Instagram, Facebook, or email via email at f4ncpodcast@gmail.com. And today we're exploring something that has the power to transform our relationships, our confidence, and our overall sense of purpose, and that's living authentically. And I started out with a quote from Tim Keller, who's no longer with us, but I thought that kind of would frame up a little bit about what we're talking about today. And when I came across that quote, I thought it was pretty fantastic. So what does it mean to live authentically? I think living authentically, at least kind of the way I look at it, means showing up as your true self in every situation. And it means embracing your strengths, your struggles, your quirks, not that I have any, and your values without trying to fit into someone else's mold. It's about shedding the mask of perfection and choosing to be real. We'll see if you guys all agree with me today or not. But I thought we'd start out with this. I did some research, and there was a study conducted all the way back in 2006 titled Authenticity and Well-Being, and it's by Kernis and Goldman. And they defined authenticity as the unimpeded operation of one's true or core self in one's daily enterprise. And the study proposed a multi-dimensional model of authenticity, including self-awareness, knowing who you are, unbiased processing, accepting strengths and weaknesses, behavioral authenticity, acting in ways that reflect your core self, and relational authenticity, being genuine in relationships. They said, we believe that authentic functioning involves a number of processes and characteristics that aid in the development and maintenance of close relationships. So, how did all of that, or do you think that sits with each and everyone as they defined authenticity with self-awareness, unbiased processing, behavioral authenticity, and relational authenticity? What do you guys think? Does that resonate? Does it sound right? Does it not sound right?
Well, it's really difficult for me to view authenticity outside of my faith paradigm, because I know what my life was like before I lived with my faith being the dominant driver of my life. And so much of it was inauthentic. I think I would really try to cater to whoever my audience was, not to initially be who I was, but just to almost shapeshift for whatever the environment was and who the audience was. And so it wasn't until I entered into a relationship with Jesus that my life was transformed, And it wasn't about that anymore, even though that old part of me was still present and is still present, and I still have to battle that. My authenticity, I like who God made me to be, actually came to life because I was connected to Him. And so I think that's what, if I were to say anything was missing there, maybe it would be an addition of my core self is who God made me to be. And once I entered that relationship with God through Jesus, I was able to step into authenticity.
That's good.
The other thing I would just add to that is I think that it is ever evolving. I think there's a level of self-discovery that's always happening. I don't think that I know everything there is to know about myself, which is strange for me to say about myself. But I don't think that I know everything that there is to know about me. So I think there are times where perhaps I'm not behaving in an authentic way, but it's only because I haven't discovered that about myself yet. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
The things that I was thinking about, you both kind of said. I think that living authentically is wonderful when you're doing it from a perspective of Christianity, because who God made you to be was somebody that lives in community and puts others first. So I think the whole culture of living authentically, in your favorite phrase, you do you, I'm going to do me.
Not my favorite phrase.
Insert sarcasm.
Yeah. I think that is, it's not, you're not really exploring your true authentic self by doing you, because you're not exploring how you fit into a community and who God made you to be.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of that, you said it's ever evolving. There are things that you don't yet know about yourself. And I think it's super freeing to be able to say, I don't know what that means, or I don't know how to do that. Can you show me? I don't know what you mean. I think that's super freeing, and it does help you to have authentic relationships with other people. But again, that's sort of a way of putting others first. I don't know what you mean. Can you show me? Let's do this together, kind of thing. That it's not. I think being your true authentic self has just as much to do with helping others be their true authentic selves.
Absolutely.
That's so good, because fundamentally we aren't made to be individuals.
Right.
And I don't know if every country in the world experiences it the way that we do in America. There's such a spirit of individualism in America and in American culture that it's like, oh, I don't need anybody else. But the reality is you do, and you're made for other people. So any self-discovery has to involve other people. So I think it's great what you said.
Brooke, it's interesting. I listened to a podcast by a couple that has a podcast called Fierce Marriage. And they asked ChatGPT what the devil would do to destroy marriages. And fifth on the list was hyper-individualism. And so it's, to your point, we definitely were not made to function independently, yet it has become a very high cultural value, which makes it hard to live authentically in our culture, because so much conspires to pull us toward hyper-individualism.
Yeah, I think rolling right into the next piece, I think you guys have all said the same thing, but dangers of people-pleasing and societal expectations, right? I mean, that's what we're kind of dancing around and saying, but when we live for the approval of others, we risk losing our true selves. Society often pressures us to conform, but true peace comes from aligning with God's purpose for our lives rather than seeking validation. There's that word, validation, from the world, right? So we've been talking about, I'll talk a little bit later in the podcast about validation. I'm sure we all will, but that's kind of a buzzword that's been showing up in my life lately. But have you guys seen that to be true in your life or your relationships with other people, that when they start getting into this world of people pleasing and what society expects, does that then cause them to lose their true self and being able to live authentically?
I would think so. But Brooke, I saw was about to speak, so I want to.
You go ahead. I will defer.
No, I saw your mouth open.
I mean, I think it can. I guess I think it can. But I think it depends on how you define people pleasing. Because if you are viewing yourself as part of a community and putting other people first, just because I'm not getting my way doesn't necessarily mean that I'm operating in a way of people pleasing. Does that make sense? So I think if you view it as, well, I seek to make sure that I'm understood and I'm seen and I'm heard and my voice is acknowledged. Sometimes, if we're being honest, my voice doesn't need to be heard and I don't need to be seen. I need to be quiet because what I have to say isn't beneficial to anybody around me. And it might be authentic and it might be real, but it isn't helpful. And so to be able to acknowledge that and then say, okay, what do I need to adjust? What do I need to fix? How I fit in the world around me. At the same time, I think we can make ourselves disappear to where then we don't even know who we are because we get so used to, oh, well, this person's going to lead, this person's going to speak, this person's going to do that, and I don't have a place. And in the same way, it's removing yourself from a place in the community. One is, more withdrawal. And does that make sense what I'm trying to say? It's all swirling around in my brain, but.
No, I appreciate you being assertive because I think you would definitely, in the past, shrink back, even in that moment, from sharing what you just shared. But I think you cast a bigger picture of what we're talking about here. It's not just so black and white.
I just think culturally there is a negative connotation to putting someone else first. And so I can see the label of people pleasing being attached to any person who's saying, no, you go before me, it's really okay. I want to listen and hear and learn. I think that's different than, well, I'm just not going to say anything because I don't want to cause waves.
It definitely is different.
Yeah, we're living out of that. I'm looking to put or please you because I'm looking to get something else out of it.
Right.
Yeah, which sacrificially or submission is not that. It doesn't come from that. Although that's what a lot of people probably think being submissive is.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not being a doormat. You can defer without being a doormat.
I think I struggled personally with that for a long time.
Elaborate on that.
Well, I think I looked at submission as you're shaking your head.
No, I was like, you struggled with being a doormat? I don't.
No,
sorry.
oh no, I don't.
So when you began to clarify, she was like, I understand.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever wouldn't classify myself as a doormat in most situations. Although I probably could find one, but not really. I've always looked at submission as being weak, as losing yourself, as you could run the gamut on so many things there. But I think as I've grown, putting other people first, especially my spouse, but putting other people first, friends, family, whatever, and being submissive and saying, hey, you know what, it's not about my preference. That's where true strength lies, because it's not easy to do. Like, you can't be submissive and be weak. Like, that's just, it's not in the true definition of what we call submissive in our culture, in our Christian culture. It's not weak. Like, you can't be weak. I guess, could you look at it from a societal expectation and say, oh, she's or he's submissive, he's just so weak, or he's what do we call whipped or whatever, and maybe that doesn't require strength, but putting other people first and being submissive requires a massive amount of strength, in my opinion. Like, it's not easy to do. and it's hard. But
Yeah.
I didn't look at it that way when I was younger.
I keep thinking about Jesus and when he was with his disciples at the Last Supper, and he realized he had all power, and then he gets up from the table and he takes the lowest position by choice to serve them. And then even when he's going to the cross and he's on his or under trial, which was a total sham, and he's being accused of things and questioned aggressively, and yet he has all power, yet he doesn't respond in the power. Well, he does respond in the power. He doesn't respond in the power in the sense that he doesn't lord it over them.
In a worldly sense.
In the worldly sense, he doesn't shut it down. And in fact, he really says very little, at times saying nothing. Or you've said, okay, yeah, you say so, okay. And it's just like, how many people do that when they're under attack? Do they have the strength and the meekness, the strength with control to not respond in kind? I want to be more like that.
I would agree. So I think some things might be helpful if you're listening to this, some signs that you might be living inauthentically in your life. I know maybe this is going to hurt a little bit, but feeling emotionally drained, struggling with self-doubt, acting differently depending on people around you, might be signs that you're not living or embracing your authentic self. And I know at times I've probably been that way. Have you guys ever found yourself doing that, or have you found people closest to you doing that? And we all have front row seats of all the people we love in our life. You get to see things. So have you guys seen that? Mm-hmm. Lots of head nodding. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Vanessa?
I think we are all in a position that puts us in contact with people who are going to be emotionally drained more often than others, just because ministry can do that. and I don't think that it's not necessarily it could have negative effects on the person experiencing it through ministry if it continues and you're not allowed to recharge and you're not doing things that are life-giving for you in the meantime, or if I can also see it being negative if you're not experiencing any fruit of your labor, so to speak, if you're continuing to pour into people and not seeing any change on their end, for their benefit. I could see it being negative in that regard. But I mean, I have seen every person at this table emotionally drained on more than one occasion. And I don't think it's necessarily in that regard because you're living inauthentically. And I see a lot in our kids, and I mean that broader circle than the 5 kids between us. But in our kids, I see it where they're emotionally drained and they're living inauthentically, but I think they're trying to figure it out a lot of the time there. And so they're changing their behavior based on who they're hanging out with, and that might change from week to week. But again, they're still trying to figure it out. And I think when you're going through that emotional development, it does matter. If you know your identity in Jesus, yes, it does matter. And it's certainly very helpful, but I don't think it's going to prevent all of it.
No way.
Because there's so much learning that's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think in those instances, that's the point. As long as learning is happening, and so if mistakes are made, they're not repeated, that kind of thing. I don't think it necessarily means you're living inauthentically, but if you're allowing yourself to stay in a situation that is causing you problems or harm, or learning is not happening, then yeah. But I don't necessarily see that as much with us.
I think the times in my life where I've struggled the most with living authentically, it's really come out of places where I've had a position of leadership of some kind, because the expectations of leadership are sometimes shifty. And there have been times for me where I have not experienced a lot of relationships that are reciprocal in nature. There's a lot of pouring out on my part and very little reciprocity, to where to risk authenticity or vulnerability in some of those relationships, that person can't handle it. Mm-hmm. That person can't handle my authenticity. It would be too heavy of a weight for them to bear. That's also true in parenting. My full authentic self when my kids were younger was too heavy of a weight for my children to bear. They didn't need me to be my full authentic self with them on every occasion, you know? And so I think where I've struggled the most is in those places where there's been a high demand in those types of relationships, to where then it is emotionally draining. So I do this thing where I just like go to sleep and like shut off. And so I think where the problem arises is when it's like my heart just goes to sleep and I'm not showing up as my authentic self anywhere because I can't in some places. So then it becomes an all or nothing, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because I think navigating and the learning of like, where is it okay? Where is it not okay? And I've made mistakes on both sides. I've made mistakes where I think I've overshared in an authentic or vulnerable way where I was just trying to be authentic, not realizing that the person on the other side couldn't handle it. I thought mm-hmm. they could. And then I realized, oh, oops, they couldn't. Yeah. And I think there have been times where I have held back when the person on the other side of the table probably could have handled a little more authenticity, and I would have maybe experienced some more genuine relationship and genuine friendship, but I squashed it either out of fear or having made mistakes in the past or whatever, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the places probably where I've struggled with it the most.
When you were talking, the word that came to mind was discretion. Mm-hmm. That discretion has a place. Because I've talked to people over the years who are like, yeah, I'm authentic. I'm just going to be me. You know, I'm just going to tell it like it is. And like, how many of you like to be around those people? Most of us are like, stranger danger. And when I've had the opportunity to speak into those people, it's like, yeah, but like if you're talking to a kid about sex, if they're 7, it's different than when they're 17. Discretion is important for us to practice. It's respectful. It's being mindful of where the other person is and speaking according to their needs, which Ephesians 4 talks about, that we should use words that speak according to the needs of the person that's on the other side of us, which is exciting because it's not like a formula, it's a relationship. But discretion really came to mind when you were talking. It's important to use discretion. Mm-hmm. And I think what you shared was very authentic, because there are times that you feel like you don't have to use as much discretion. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I should have used more discretion. And there are other times where it's like you've been guarded because you've been hurt mm-hmm. by maybe not showing enough discretion, but you could have shown less and let the guard down. Mm-hmm. So it's not a formula. And I know we're going to talk more about this. So I'm throwing it back to Charles.
Yeah, I think what all of you are saying is pretty amazing, not because you already had the notes, but how you flowed now right into this next piece. But I think to your point, there's a reason that we don't have our circle of intimacy. We've talked about that before, is small. Maybe it's some of your family, very close friends, and that's about it. I think there's a reason. As I was processing this, it came to mind. There's a reason I think that is, because just like you said, not everybody can handle us being really authentic. And I think you're only going to have a select small group of people in your life that really can handle you being authentic, or you being authentic, or you being authentic. Because some, you know, depending on a lot of reasons, maybe they're not ready for it. Maybe they're in a different place. Maybe it just wouldn't be appropriate to share. I mean, there's so many reasons why that would be the case. But I think that's why that close group is so important, because you can be 100% authentic, which goes back to what we're about to talk about, which is the V word. But it's pretty amazing that that's the case. And Humble Daily, if you don't follow Humble Daily, I would recommend it. It's a site, and they send stuff to me every day, but it's pretty amazing. And they had this.
That's the Daily.
That's the Daily, yeah. Yeah, thanks. They recently sent a thing to my inbox. It said, "Stop pretending." And it's essentially about this. And this was after the podcast was already written and we had already decided to do this. But they write in here that real relationships require real honesty. And I think that's probably why a lot of our relationships, we wouldn't go, oh, they're super authentic, they're super rare, because we can't, some people just can't handle the honesty from us, or vice versa. You know what I mean? So they talk about vulnerability in this article a lot, and you brought it up, and I think we all kind of know it. But vulnerability, by definition, implies risk. The word vulnerability itself comes from a Latin word, vulnus, meaning wound. So to be vulnerable literally means opening yourself up to being wounded. Vulnerable.
You're getting there.
Are you feeling wounded right now?
Yes, I'm feeling, yes.
By your self-talk? By our laughter?
This is me being authentic. Oh, vulnerability requires the courage to risk being hurt, misunderstood, or rejected in pursuit of something greater, true intimacy, genuine connection, and authentic love. So why is that? Why is living authentically in that regard? Why do you guys think that's so important? Deeper connections, meaningful relationships that they specifically brought up. Why is that really so important? And I think some of you touched on it at the very beginning of this podcast, but I think it would be important for us to kind of unpack that a little bit.
Well, you spoke about community, and that Vanessa did in the beginning of the podcast. You can't call other people to vulnerability if you're not being vulnerable yourself. Henry Blackaby, in his study Experiencing God years ago, said you can't take someone where you haven't gone yourself. So I think if you've got someone who's posing, who's pretending, posers bring about more posers. Like, you ever see someone talking about how great they are? A lot of times you'll see other people trying to talk about their achievements or what they can do to try to feel valuable, affirmed, whatever it may be.
Or even part of the conversation.
Yeah, even part of the one-upmanship, and it's just, I want to be included. It may not even be that deep. It may not be even, they may not even be thinking about one-upmanship. It may just, I want to be a part, because we're made for community, kind of going back to that point. But when somebody is truly living in a vulnerable position, it invites it, and posers are repelled by it. Either they're going to change, or they're going to be repelled by those environments and those people. So yeah, that's what that brought about in my mind.
I think it's I think it is most helpful when that type of vulnerability is reciprocal. If one of the things I've been working on the past few years is not taking things personally, and I think that has helped me open myself up to criticism a little bit better. But the criticism is always better for me when it comes from a place of, how can I do things better for you? I feel like I'm talking in a giant circle. If Charles comes to me and says, this thing that you did really hurt me, or I don't think that we are agreeing on this particular point. Can we talk about it? This is what you did. It made me feel this way. If I am open to that, then I better know how to relate to him. It needs to be reciprocal in that if he does something, or even in the course of that conversation, that hurts me or that is preventing us from coming to an agreement or a consensus or whatever, if he's not vulnerable and open to receive that, then we're still not going to get anywhere. And now I'm going to be less likely to be vulnerable the next time. Exactly. Because what good does it do?
Do not cross this line.
Right. Respect my boundaries.
Yeah, right? Boundaries must be respected.
But so again, I think it's all tied together. And if you look at it from a place outside yourself, it's a whole lot easier.
Well, I think that's the key, is that I think we tend to view words like this or conversations like this from the perspective of self, which you have to. You have to include yourself because you are part of it, but you are only part of it. And I think if you talk about vulnerability, but you're only talking about yourself, then it's the risk that I might get hurt and I might miss out and I might not have, but you're failing to see the we. And so if you approach a conversation, whether it's, criticism in nature or just a sharing of feelings, when you recognize we are part of a we, whether we like the we or not, we are part of a we. And I think in the closest circles, hopefully we like the we. I like our marriage relationship. I'm happy to be part of that we. But I'm also part of a much larger group of people that actions.
There's a wee.
That's right. But my actions and my attitudes and the things that I do also impact other people, whether I really know them, whether I really like them or not. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, I have to open myself up to be wounded by people who I don't even like in order to be part of a community. And I think we have to see ourselves as part of a community, not just as an individual with, people in our wake, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
Sounds really easy to do.
Yeah, super easy. Because people are everywhere. Go be a hermit someplace.
I mean, based on that statement, I think I want to go be a hermit somewhere. Like, being wounded by people I don't know. I don't know. So they said vulnerability creates a doorway through which genuine relationship can enter. Authentic friendship isn't based on mutual admiration of strengths. It's rooted in shared recognition of brokenness, need, and grace. And, I think when I was thinking about this, we have this conversation, not a lot, but we've had it over the course of our friendship, the years, multiple times. I think when vulnerability is shared and it's reciprocal, I think that's when I found myself connected to you three the most, when I'm like, okay, there's shared need for grace. There's shared, normally I'm the one who needs most of the grace, but there's shared need for grace and brokenness, and to hear that I screw something up because that's not fair. So I'll screw something up, and then I hear you say something like, "Oh, well, I've done that too," and not that you're trying to say me too, because it's not a me too thing. But really being understanding that we're all hashtag me too, that we're all broken in some way, and knowing that and hearing that creates a bond that you can't have, to your point, if you're posing. You can't, because you're never going to get to that level of real and honest, because most people, to your point, and we're going through a study, and most people put on a facade of who they want other people to see, because of woundedness, because of, multitude of reasons why it happens. But most people do that instead of just saying, hey, you know what, I'm screwed up, I'm broken, I botch things up all the time.
The crazy thing is, it seems like you would like it if everybody thought that you were great and perfect and wonderful. But the problem is that you know yourself. And so if you always had people around you telling you how great you were, for me at least, it would be like when I'm by myself, like nobody knows me. Mm-hmm. If they ever find out, they're not going to like me anymore because they think I'm so great. I can't possibly live up to this. And I think a lot of people cut off relationships with people and just say, okay, we're done, for fear of other people finding out that they aren't who they think they are. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Because it's just strange. Like, it seems like, oh, I'd love it for everybody to think I'm great. But really, that's not what we want, because that doesn't bring that connection. It doesn't bring that depth of relationship at all, because we all know, even if we pretend like we have it all together, we all know that we're broken and we don't have it all together, and we're like the 13-year-old still trying to figure it out in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. I think I love what you said. I think it's hard, though, because I think a lot of people aren't willing to your point, stick through that and live in a state of grace with other people. I think it's very easy when things happen, and I'll operate from a mistakes standpoint. When you make mistakes in a relationship with other people, whether it be your friends or your wife or your parents, whatever, sometimes on the other side of that, people are willing to say, you know what, I don't need that grace, you're screwed up, you messed this up, and I'm done with this relationship. And I don't know if that's because there's not real honesty and real vulnerability in that relationship. Maybe that's the reason there's not that connection where people would be willing to stick it out. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Do you think, as I'm processing this, and then I don't do a very good job processing quickly in this, but I'm thinking that maybe there's something to that where people, because they're trying to put on a false self, that they're not willing to sit with somebody through something that's raw and honest. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Does that make sense?
I think people have valued their own personal happiness over everything else. And so when it gets hard, it's like, well, I'll just go find another relationship or another set of friends where it's not hard. Like, we get you sit down with new friends and it's like, oh, this is fun. Like, you don't have expectations, and it's new, and people do it, and with a second marriage, or they start, they have an affair, and it's like, this is new. They don't have the expectations my husband or wife has, and so, I mean, they get drawn into it, and it's like, I was talking with a friend the other day who really struggles with the feeling side of their relationship with God. And one of the things that I've heard them say often is, when I was first in this relationship with God, it was exciting. So much was happening. New things were being revealed to me. And it's like, I haven't felt that in a long time. And so it's like work. And I was thinking about it, and I said, well, how much of that is like dating and marriage? It's like in dating, you have all these first, and you have those butterflies, and you have the first time you hold your girlfriend's hand, in my case, and then the first time you have that kiss, and it's just like, it's electric. And then it's like, but then you've been married 26 years, and you hold hands, and you don't have that same feeling. But it doesn't mean you can't have something great. And I think because it gets a little bit harder and you don't have that feeling, for a lot of people, it's like, well, I'll just go find that feeling again. And that's why people hit the eject button, and they don't experience the finer things and a mature love because they're not willing to put in the work. And like, when we look at the person of Jesus, he was willing to suffer on behalf of those that he was in relationship with. And he modeled for us this life of, I'm willing to suffer and pour myself out on behalf of others. And on the other side of that, there's redemption, there's resurrection, there's true life. It's not all the facade of, like when we go back to when you're first dating, because how much of you is really being authentic on that first date? How much, where does the authenticity really come? It's much later. And when you know that you're loved for who you are, not for the facade of who you are, that's real.
Yeah.
I want real love.
Yeah. I think that's part of the reason that people aren't real and aren't honest, because they're afraid of that. And we talked about it earlier. I think they're afraid of that rejection that comes from, I can't really tell Brian how I'm feeling, or how broken I am, or how this I am, or how that, because he's going to reject me, and then I'm not going to have a friendship with Brian. I got to go find a friendship with somebody else. And I think it's on both sides. I see it play out on both sides. And I think, probably truth be told, I think the reason that a lot of people, at least in my opinion, aren't really living authentically is because they're so scared of what's going to happen if they really are.
Fear.
Yeah.
A lot of fear.
And I think, we talk about this a lot, or we have been lately. I think that's part of the tactics of the enemy. I think that's, he wants you to live that way. He wants you to be fearful. He wants you to say, if you're really you, no one will like you. If they really knew what I was thinking in my alone time when I'm at my house by myself, well, they wouldn't like me.
And what a great way to isolate you from community. And you watch, National Geographic or whatever, and you watch any predator going to attack any prey. Isolation is, the name of the game. Usually it's the slower, weaker ones, but it doesn't really matter if you could just get somebody.
Yeah.
I say somebody, some animal off by itself. It's vulnerable, no matter how strong it is.
Yeah.
If it's not a predatory animal, it doesn't have enough defense on its own to withstand that predator. So what a great tactic of the enemy to isolate and to keep you separated from community.
I think another aspect to what you're talking about the isolation, is actually, it's counterintuitive to think that it's another aspect of it, but you were talking about friendships based on mutual admiration. It's not an authentic, true friendship, and it creates isolation. If I am a parrot to you of what I see in you that I like, because I like those things about me, and I'm going to tell you, oh, you're so great at XYZ, and then so are you. You come back at so are you, and so that becomes our identity,
and the identity of our relationship.
Exactly.
Yep.
And it's so surface because it's based on this one idea that we have so many blind sides that way, because we don't have this voice over here, this voice over here. If it's just that we're good at this one thing or whatever,
And we have fun doing it, and we like it.
We have so much fun doing this one thing, and it happens with fads and groups and, movements. It happens en masse that way, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And it can be very isolating, and it can be, imagine if we were way back in the colonies, if we all just talked
Howdy,
about,
Pilgrim.
if we all just talked about how good we were at carpentry,
No.
but we're just pretending. If we're all real great at carpentry, and so everybody starts building things, who's growing things? Who's, you know what I mean?
And the person who is good at growing things wouldn't risk being good at growing things.
They're
'cause
over
then
there
they
trying to
wouldn't
figure out how to use a hammer and nail so they fit in.
Yeah. And it's another podcast, but I had a whole thing about spiritual giftedness and people doing that very same thing. You know, just, I see this in this person and I like that and that's what I think I should do. And so there are aspects greatly missing in the body of the church because nobody's mentoring for gifts that aren't seen, you know. So nobody's growing anything. They're all over there with a hammer and nails, you know. Different podcasts, different, but absolutely what you're talking about.
Sounds like you're leading that for
the group
the next time.
misses out. No, I didn't
oh,
say
yeah.
that.
Yeah. Take back that I can't lead anymore. You're about to.
That's me being assertive.
For you.
I struggle with that.
So I think it would be helpful for us to transition to some practical steps on how to embrace authenticity in everyday life. I think we've kind of danced around some of these, but it's not just a switch. We can't flip it. We can't just decide that, hey, today we're going to be authentic. I mean, if we've been living in a way that we would agree is not 100% authentic, and I don't, as much as I think we all want to be 100% authentic, there are places in my life I'm like, if I'm really honest, I'm like, I may shy away from a conversation here. I may shy away from a conversation there. And for lots of reasons, maybe it's discretion or discernment. But how do we practice living with integrity and honesty every day? I mean, you brought it up. Jesus modeled it perfectly. No one else is going to be able to model that as perfectly as he did. You know, he was never afraid to speak the truth, but he always did it in love. Mostly, always did it in love. When we live authentically, we get to reflect that and be closer to him. But how do you guys? Some practical steps, and I've got some, but I'm curious to what you guys think on what some practical steps for you, because I know we've all practiced this. I know we do.
I'm going to go ahead and get it out of the way. I'll get it out of the way.
Do it.
As you were talking, the first thing that popped into my head, part of what has become a prayer time for me over the last more than a year at this point. I use the app, the Lectio 365 app, and at the very end of almost every day is a prayer that's, I think what I like about it's a little liturgical in some of the format of it, but the last prayer of the day is, Father, help me live this day to the full, being true to you in every way. Jesus, help me to give myself away to others, being kind to everyone I meet. And Spirit, help me to love the lost, proclaiming Christ in all I do and say. And I think the simple act of that prayer is orienting for the day to just recognize, okay, I want to be true to God the Father, living out of that authentic self, who he made me to be true to him. Be willing to give myself away to others. And kindness is, is key. So being willing to submit myself to other people, to surrender to somebody else's preferences, and then to see that there is a world around me of people who don't have a relationship with Jesus, and look for opportunities to let those people know who Jesus is. Yeah. I think that is orienting and grounding for starting the day and before my feet leave the house. I think that helps. Do I get it perfect? Absolutely not. But I think it's better after having focused on that sort of thing, and taking a moment to pray before I go in places, even something even as simple as more of you, Jesus, and sometimes it's more of you, like I already know, and sometimes it's I don't know what's facing me in there. So
yeah, Brooke, I would come alongside and say, as I was thinking about what he asked, I kept thinking about John 15 and this idea of abiding or remaining in Christ. And if you look at John 15, like verses 1 through 17, and the only reason this is in my head is because I've been meditating on it recently. I went and counted the amount of times we see the word remain. It's 10 times. And I may have miscounted, but I don't think I did. But 10 times. When you see a word being repeated, and in this case it's Jesus saying remain. If you don't remain, you're not going to bear fruit. But if you do remain, you will bear much fruit. So if reality is created by God, and the greatest reality we live is his reality, then when we abide and remain, we actually are living the most authentic version of ourselves. And one tangible example that I've tried to put into practice is from the book Practicing His Presence by Brother Lawrence. And so I'm trying to be mindful that in whatever I'm doing, Jesus is there, because he is. Mm-hmm. I'm there, he's there, the Holy Spirit's here. And when we think of this in terms of community, God's put me around people to give life, not take life, in my words and my actions and whatever I'm doing. And so I was at a restaurant yesterday with a group of men that are in a men's group. I lead two men's groups right now, and one of them meets on Thursday morning. And so we have a lunch on one Friday a month. And we were at this restaurant, and one of the things I frequently have gotten in the practice of doing is asking the server their name. And then before we pray for our meal, ask them how we can pray for them. We were at a Thai restaurant, and the lady said her name was Karen, which I did not expect because she did not look like a Karen. But, and this is yesterday, when I asked her that question, she said, no one has ever asked me that question. And I'm thinking, why not? It bothered me at my core. And so she talked about her mom and her grandmother being in California. She doesn't get to see them very often. And she just, will you pray for them and then pray for us and our relationship? And so like what she's craving, even though she's probably, I mean, I'm making an assumption and that no one's ever asked her if they could pray for her, that she's probably not a religious person, that she wants what we all want. She wants connection. And so that's what it means to live authentically.
What you got? Any practical steps?
After that, I got nothing.
That's why I got out of the way. I went first. I didn't know what he was going to say, but I went ahead and got it out of the way.
And I've got some we'll talk about in a second, but
well, can I speak for you for a second? I think when you're living your most authentic self, you're able to create. God has made you to be a creative. And so the joy that you emanate when you're in a place where you feel the freedom to create, it's awesome to watch. And even Brooke yesterday was talking about you with all the balloons.
No spoilers.
Well, this won't come out before tomorrow.
We celebrate 5 years as a church tomorrow, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But Brooke was just talking about your genuine joy and how much she loved it. So I don't know if that answers the question necessarily, but we need to help you live out of that authentic self because that's who God made you to be. So thanks for letting me speak. You may have some other things you want to share.
I do think one of the things I've learned, just even since we've been friends,
like it was yesterday.
Well,
I'm sorry. The many, many years,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm old.
Yes, you are.
So in the
No,
grand
you're
scheme
not.
of things.
Okay.
But I don't think I think I have grown a lot in the last decade. Let me put it this way, as far as my self-awareness and things that I used to do probably far too frequently that other people found annoying. And when I first started coming to these realizations, why are you looking at me like that?
I didn't say anything. Go ahead.
It was like, oh, and then it was kind of like, ew, I don't like this about myself. And so it's just to be authentically me and also not annoy others around me. I think practicing slowing down with my words and being very specific sometimes with what I am saying, so that I'm not rushing into something or interrupting somebody or being misunderstood, which I can't stand. So I think taking the time to embrace a moment of silence and collect my thoughts helps me to live authentically, to say something when I think I need to say something, but also not annoy people around me, because I don't like to do that. So yes, slowing down and not being afraid to be silent for a moment while I collect my thoughts.
Can I say one thing about that?
Sure.
I think that's fantastic. I do think that when other people are annoyed, sometimes it's less about you and more about them.
That's probably absolutely true. They're coming from whatever place they're coming from. They've been in traffic, or, they have.
Well, I'll make it even more specific.
Okay.
Oftentimes when I say something, my natural gravitation is to think about things more in black and whites. Brooke thinks in a kaleidoscope. So she sees all different possibilities. And there have been times where I say something and she's like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about that?
He finds that annoying.
Well, no.
Not anymore. He found it annoying.
I sometimes still find it annoying.
See?
But dogmatically, I don't find it annoying, because what I realize is quite often I need that perspective to be able to see that there are way more perspectives to a situation than what I'm seeing, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier. So if someone is annoyed, it oftentimes is saying more about them than about you. I'm not saying you shouldn't be aware, and you should consider, I think all those things are great, but I wouldn't want you to take all that upon yourself that, well, I said this and they're annoyed, so I need to shut down, because your assertiveness is still, it's needed. Your voice is needed and it's wanted. I think you need to hear that.
Well, I'm going to take it a step further and just say that I cannot think of a time that I've ever found you annoying, even though you definitely jumped into my bubble when we first met. You were very, very, hi, let's be friends. But you know what? I was not annoyed. I was like, wow, I've never met this person before. She's happy, and I liked it, even though I didn't know what to do with it. And I'm so thankful, though, because we wouldn't be friends had you not done that. So.
See, your assertiveness.
So
your assertiveness was
important.
important.
Your assertiveness is important, and so to his point, and I may have given off the vibe that I was annoyed. I wasn't annoyed. I just didn't know what to do. So, I just want to be clear that had you not done that, you were an initiator in our relationship. And to Brian's point, my lack of assertiveness in that arena at that time very much came from being in a place where there had been a lot of hurt. So I would not have initiated a relationship had you not stepped in and done that. So I think the Lord used that to be the, beginnings of a friendship that I find extraordinarily valuable. And I have learned and grown a whole lot, and I'm very thankful for. So anyway, how's that for vulnerable and authentic? And, now I feel awkward. Hey, I
Why?
love you. Love you too.
You seem like you feel exposed.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be different if it was just the two of us having a conversation, but I just became aware that it wasn't just the two of us having a conversation, So.
I don't think anybody's looked at your relationship and gone, wow, I think that's kind of known. So it's not necessarily specifically what you said, but I think it's kind of known. Like, I think it's kind of neat. Actually, it's a lot neat, not just kind of neat. I think it's neat. What I've learned over the last couple weeks, and this is going to sound funny, this podcast was written before we started a men's group. And I think, and it's not on the list of what I wrote down for examples, but I think right now, if I could point to one thing that I would share with anybody about living authentically, it would be to understand where your validation comes from. I think it's easy to live inauthentically when you are trying to get your validation from your spouse or from your friends or from a group of people or your job or an organization or your boss or whoever. And you can shape shift and do things that are not authentic to you or not how God created you to do because you're seeking validation from someplace other than Him.
Yep.
And I think if there's anything I've learned over the last couple of weeks, it's been that. And I would have told you 5 weeks ago, that my validation absolutely came from Him. But then when I started examining my life and kind of my feelings and all these things that are wrapped up in this book that we're processing, it was pretty evident sometimes that my validation, I was not seeking it from Him. And that caused and still causes grief for me from a mental standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from a relationship standpoint with my wife, with my friends, with it all ties into that for me. If you're seeking your validation from anything other than God, you're going to struggle. It's just going to be a problem. Uh-huh. And I think it's easy to say you do, but until you really do some work and think about where some of your wounds have come from or how you operate in certain situations, because we all have patterns that we have, and they're based on wounds and past and all these things. But until you stop and do some self-examining there, I think it's really easy to say things and mean them, but not really operate out of that world. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to say? And the book is Wild at Heart from John Eldredge, and it's primarily a men's book, really, but it's not. Most of it, I encourage Vanessa. I'm like, I really want you to read it, not because of any other reason. I think there's a lot of good things in it that would be applicable for her life as well, especially when it comes to the wounds and validation. But man, if you haven't read that book, read it. It's really good. And I know I've said that a lot about a lot of books in my life over the last couple of years, but there have been some key books that have really stood out, and this is one of them. But it's really kind of flipped my world upside down to say, if I want to be authentic, I've got to change that piece, which will allow things like being vulnerable to come much more easily. If I know where my validation comes from, I'm not necessarily so worried about what Brian thinks about me anymore. Now, I want to have a healthy relationship with him. I don't want to do things that cause problems between us, and I'm not just going to randomly say things because I'm not concerned with that. But if I'm trying to seek validation from him as a friend and as a mentor, I'm not ever going to be authentic with him, ever. Like, I'm always going to say things that is trying to position me in a way that gets him to give me an attaboy or, whatever the case may be. And that's not helpful for our relationship. Now, if I come at that going, hey, you know what? I want to seek mentorship from you, but at the end of the day, My validation comes from what God thinks about me.
Absolutely.
And not what Brian, the man, because he's a man just like everybody else, what Brian thinks about me. I want him to like me, but at the end of the day, if he doesn't, because okay. And that was these last couple weeks, we talked about a little bit, have been kind of freeing in the fact that there have been some things I've been able to kind of push away and drop. Now, not everything, but some things I've been able to go, okay, that's not healthy. And that's a problem. And not necessarily authentically, but it goes back to authenticity because I'm really not living out who God called me to be.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, God created all of us differently, and we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And if I live out of trying to get validation from other people, I'm not living out my life the way God made me to live.
That's right.
Which is a problem. Right? I think that allows you to, look at some of these things I put on the list, like being vulnerable. That allows you to be vulnerable, right? And if you want to live authentically, you have to share your real thoughts and emotions, and you can do it in a way that are respectful. You don't have to go, shouting your opinions on the street corner anymore. I think that's not helpful. It may be you may be sharing what you really think, but I don't think it's helping anybody. And I think when you live with that validation, surrounding yourself with authentic people becomes easier because you're not seeking your validation from other people. Mm-hmm. And then you can say, okay, your experience is this. I want to hear that. I want to share my experience with you. I want to, and I'm not worried about what you think about me. I'm just going to say, here's where we're at. And I've got shared pain here, or I don't know anything about that. Tell me about that. And that creates a connection when you ask people about themselves because you genuinely want to know about them and you want them to be authentic, man, things change in relationships. Like light bulbs come off because everybody wants to be known and seen. Everybody. I think there are a couple, like if you're listening to this, like setting boundaries, I think are also important. I think when you think about it, and you guys might disagree, I'd love to hear your opinion, but setting boundaries, knowing who you are and where you're going to be okay, and saying no to things that you shouldn't, don't align with your authentic self are important. And I give you an example, just as for me. Recently I was at a concert. I took my son and his friend to a concert, and it was a band that I've listened to for a while, many, many years, actually since like 2000. And I found myself in this concert listening to lyrics and being around people in a way that did not align with my authentic self. And up until that point, I didn't have any boundaries there, really. I've always just, music's music, whatever. I've been, even as a kid, it caused problems with my aunt. Looking back at it now, I get her position. I don't necessarily agree with everything that was done to process it. It doesn't matter. But looking back, I think she was probably right in some regards. But I found myself in the middle of this concert feeling horrible, going, this is not who I'm made to be, and this is not somewhere I should be. And it would be very easy for me to say, it's just a concert. My kid's having a great time. All these people are having a great time. They're all screaming and yelling. But inside of me, I was shrinking, going, this is bad for me. Like, have you guys found, like, setting boundaries, have you found that to be, or do you have any examples of anything in that situation where maybe you found yourself with somebody or in a situation where you're like, this doesn't align with my authentic self? Maybe you haven't. I don't know.
I would say, I think Brian mentioned posers before, and I think if I find myself in a situation with people who it's clear that they are seeking validation from other sources, it's not so much that I won't have anything to do with those people. I think that's a little bit different. I definitely have boundaries and things that I will watch or listen to. I absolutely draw some pretty hard lines on some things like that, just because I really do think that what we feed ourselves influences more than we recognize. So I'm not saying that I'm, only watch, Christian movies or anything like that. I do draw lines and boundaries in those places, but I think in terms of relationships, it's less about not having anything to do with that, as it's more setting limits and recognizing that there are certain situations where I will be able to sit down with a person or be with a person and potentially have influence, but I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time trying to convince somebody to do something differently. I'm just going to sow some seeds, maybe water seeds that have been sown by somebody else, and step away so that I don't find myself falling into that same pattern of, one-upmanship or posing or whatever else, or putting myself in a position where I'm going to be hurt unnecessarily because this other person isn't operating from that same place. So it's more about setting limits, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If you don't, that's okay. I just was asking.
I mean, I can think of one. I can think of one instance. You guys are gonna know what I'm talking about, but I can think of one instance where I had to have a conversation with somebody because they repeatedly and continually were talking about something in front of me and in front of other people that was about me, but they kept making comments about something about me. And I remember being very uncomfortable. Oh. And I even called you about it. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I think I do, but I'm not sure.
And I had to have a conversation with this person about not doing this thing anymore. And it wasn't, again, it was something that was being done in public, but it just needed to stop. So, yes, I set a boundary there. And that relationship was fine for a period of time after that. I mean, it was fine. It was well received. The behavior stopped. It was fine. But across the board, I can't really.
Cool.
Yeah, I would say I set boundaries in multiple areas of my life as far as like whom I'm around in what situations, and I think that may be another podcast. What I set before my eyes, what I listen to, because I think people just take so much in the vein of entertainment that I'm not entertained by it. And it's like, it's kind of silly, but like going back to when Brooke and I were 7th grade, middle school volunteers. We were college aged, volunteering with middle school kids at a church years ago. And the middle school pastor kind of had some funny illustrations, but he talked about this delicious ice cream called squirrel poop ice cream. And it just has a little bit of squirrel poop in it, but the rest of it's like vanilla, and it's
like Moose Tracks.
Yeah, it's like Moose Tracks. Like it's mostly vanilla. It's just got a little bit of squirrel poop in it, but of course you would never eat that. You're not going to eat those nuggets. And you're not going to eat the vanilla ice cream around the
surrounding the nuggets. No.
And so he compared that to watching and listening to entertainment that just has a little bit of, it just has a little bit of nudity. It just has a little bit of sex, and trying to honor God with our lives, our mind, our thoughts, our words. So that was just one vein that kind of my brain went down. But what I did want to address before, I know we're close to landing this podcast, is what you were talking about in terms of validation. Couple things about that. First of all, when you make the decision and you're consciously saying, my validation does not come from anything apart from my relationship with Jesus, it's from him and him alone, it takes the pressure off other people. And then it makes your relationships more authentic because they're not worried about hitting a trigger where, Charles is going to blow up if I say this. I'm going to have to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And it's not just you, it's anybody.
Sure.
So you free people up to then be their authentic selves and to have the connection you desire when you find your validation with Jesus. The other thing is when you give with people or your performance or whatever it is, the power to validate you, you also give it the power to invalidate you. So you're giving people power that they're not meant to wield, and they may not want to wield, but you're giving it to them. Or it may be a performance, which I've been guilty of this in the past so many times. Preaching, gym, whatever it may be, where I've gotten so caught up in it that I'm upset because I've been looking to that performance for my validation. And so when you're outside of that and you're going, no, it's here, well then I can be like, it's one performance in the big scheme of everything else, and God can still use it. And he does. He can grow me. He can grow other people. Sometimes when I think I've done my worst messages, I oftentimes, stumbling here, have people come to me and say, wow, that was really good. I'm thinking, that stunk. But it's not about me. And my validation isn't found in that. So I can move on. The last thing is there is a counterpart to Wild at Heart called Captivating. Mm-hmm. And so if Vanessa hasn't read that, you mentioned wanting her to read Wild at Heart, which I think is a great recommendation. The book Captivating, I would highly recommend too. And even Brooke and I have had conversations about taking some...
It too addresses the wounds, but it addresses it from
the
female perspective.
Yeah.
Which would probably be more meaningful in the sense of...
Sure.
The lies spoken into those wounds would be more in line with what she would resonate
with. And we go
but
ahead,
reading
I'm sorry.
Wild at Heart
Yeah.
is also a very good recommendation because I've read Captivating.
Yeah.
And I've read Wild at Heart.
And she's read
Yeah.
Wild at Heart.
We talked about doing that, like switching, but we haven't reached anything. But if later on down the road there's going to be something about Captivating, then I'm just not going to have her do anything, and you can just do whatever you want. So that'll be great. I think she'd get a lot out of it if it's like Wild at Heart, and from listening to conversations that I think it is probably. She probably needs to go through that as much as I needed to go through Wild at Heart.
I would agree. I think everybody does.
Yeah, yeah. The validation piece is hard. It's tough,
But it's liberating.
Yeah.
And we're going to pick hard regardless. Like someone sent us a video about that. Mm-hmm. Is it harder to fight to find your validation where you can really find it, or is it harder to live trying to find your validation where you can't find it? Mm-hmm. Choose your hard.
Right. Yeah. So as we land, any words of wisdom that you guys felt like you didn't share or you want to share, or everybody's like, I don't know, I say anything else. Don't do that. But if you don't, then that's fine too. But if you have anything you want to share, I'd love to hear it.
You keep looking at me and I continue to be silent because
you're my wife.
I think I have nothing else.
Okay.
She says no.
I've said my piece.
You've done a good job of asking the questions. Brooke, do you have any closing words of wisdom?
I don't think I have any closing words of wisdom. I think I have said everything that I thought. I think this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed having this conversation and thinking about authenticity and vulnerability in a slightly different way. And through the course of the conversation, I had some thoughts that were shared that I didn't necessarily have before we sat down and had this conversation. So I think that in and of itself is the value of sitting down and having a conversation. It's just, I think growing happened just from being able to talk about this. And I too agree with you that validation piece is huge. When you know that you are a beloved child of God, you don't have to fear authenticity or vulnerability. If you get hurt, I mean, so what? Like, I know that sounds a little bit calloused, but I mean, Jesus said, if you try to save your life, you'll lose it. And whoever loses his life finds it. And I think that's a lot of the point. I think the more we try to control, the more we try to grasp, the more we try to make everything work out for ourselves the way we think it should, we end up really losing. And when we're willing to say, okay, I mean, I trust you, God, with my days and my days and my time and my relationships. And so whatever happens. I trust that you're going to work it out. And if it's not great, you're going to redeem it and you're going to make it good. So that's it.
My thing would be going back to the original questions and really the entire podcast. This is my thought. You can't find your validation apart from a relationship with God through Jesus. And the good news is that's available to everybody. I listened to a podcast this past week where someone described what Jesus did as the greatest rescue mission of all time. And the verse, John 3:16, which a lot of people are familiar with, God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. That's available to everybody. And so when you choose to receive the invitation of Jesus, who paid the price for our sins by going to the cross and shedding his blood to pay for them, something we couldn't do on our own, and you receive that invitation, you are made righteous, you are made whole, you are made complete, and nothing can take that away from you. Even though we still deal with the brokenness of this world, that's the reality you rest in. And so I would just say, for someone who doesn't have that relationship or is unsure, I would say, man, receive the invitation of Jesus. Receive what he's done for you in paying the price for your sins, so that you can find true validation and not have to continue to search for it with other wells that are dry. It's the only life-giving place. I'm convinced of it. I've lived it. I know a lot of other people have. You guys at this table have as well. So that would be my last words of wisdom, I guess, if you want to live your authentic self, is to receive the invitation of Jesus.
Yeah. Awesome. I think living authentically is a journey. It's not a destination. I wish it were, but actually I don't, because then we wouldn't grow. But it takes courage, but it's fulfilling. And, you know, we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd like to hear what you think living authentically actually means to you. Share your story with us on social media, on email at f4ncpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to keep the conversation going. It sounds like we have some more podcasts coming, maybe that have sprung out of this one, so that'll be nice. Sorry we've been so long. Life has been busy, and it's going to continue to be busy, but we will try to get as many of these done as we can over the course of the next whoever knows how long. But if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. Share it with someone who needs this message. And I would encourage you to say that's probably most of everyone, not because we created this podcast, but because I needed it. And I'm kind of like everybody. So until next time, keep living, loving, and being real. So see ya.